The government has no plans as of now to charge tech giants like Facebook and Google for using news content of publishers. In fact, the Australia model that was widely spoken about, where the government of Australia was the first country to decide that news publications will have to be paid for if their content is used by media or social media giants in their news feed. However, India now says that there is no such plans to emulate the same model here. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Minister of State for Information and Technology, said in a response to questions raised by Shashi Tharoor in Parliament, where Mr. Chandrasekhar said that the government is aware of the growing risks of dominance of various big tech platforms on the internet, but presently there is no proposal for enactment of a law in this regard by the ministry. The Australian Parliament in February 2021, like I mentioned, had enacted a law called the News Media and Digital Platform Mandatory Bargaining Code. As per this law, global digital companies will have to pay for the local news content. So we will have experts throw light on this issue to help us understand both sides of the argument. But before I go across to our guests on the show, let me first introduce reporter Mohit Bhatt, who is joining us on this update. Mohit, what can we share with our viewers in this regard? Because again, in terms of news content, now social media giants are also using it a lot because that draws a lot of traffic. Which is why this whole debate around whether those publications, those publishing houses should be paid for their content being reflected in social media. What is the word coming out of the Indian government in this issue?
Well, yes, Shashi Tharoor, who is also the member of parliament from the Congress party, and he raised a question and he said that whether the government had taken the cognizance of the law that has been enacted by Australia regarding like tech giants like Google, Facebook, they have to pay the local media companies if they publish the news on their platforms. Now, to which the reply has come from the government, which clearly says, as of now, they do not have anything in this particular regard. They are not in the process of enacting any law, and also they know about the law which has been enacted by Australia, but as of now there are no plans to enact such law in the country. Now, they also stated that several steps have been taken to ensure the safety of the people on the social media sites and how exactly India will be going forward in terms of the safety. But you see, the reason that has been given by the Australian side when they enacted this law was that in Australia specifically, Facebook and Google are the entrance, are the major source of internet access by the people over there, because generally people, they use Google, they use Facebook, and then these media companies are forced. These media companies are particularly forced to put forward their news on Facebook and Google because it draws a lot of traffic, and hence they should be paid for that, and hence a law was being enacted. But similarly in India, that is not being taken consideration of. The government has clearly said no, because you see, many experts have said that Google and Facebook are two platforms on which you'll have to, the news companies have to put on their articles, because many of the youngsters, people from various age group, they use Facebook and Google, and they're like entrance to the internet in many cases, and hence these media companies are forced to publish their articles, and hence Google and Facebook should pay to local media companies if they use any of their articles. So the arguments and the counter arguments are coming in, but in case of India, nothing of that sort will be happening. Back to you.
Okay, that is important. In fact, this has sparked off a debate as well now on whether there should be a similar law in India. Well, we do understand that the government has clarified on this matter, saying no such proposal as of now. But let's understand this a bit more clearly. MOSIT has said this in response to Shashi Tharoor's query, saying that no proposal by the government to charge Facebook and Google for news, like Australia is doing right now. The Australian government was the first in the world to have a media legislation in this regard passed in Parliament that forces Google and Facebook to negotiate a fair payment with news organizations for using their content in Facebook's newsfeed and Google's search. Remember, all these social media giants now have a separate news feed. So for all news updates as well, these social media giants have become the go-to place. Centre says no such proposal as of now, but there are two opinions on it. There is, of course, one side that believes that this new
20 years easily. You had media baron Rupert Murdoch talking about the fact that news organizations need to be paid by tech giants who share their news, particularly Google, because Google people search for news and they end up looking at news, which was created not by Google, not by the algorithms of Google, but by hardworking reporters and editors. And there's a lot of money spent on news gathering by news organizations.
Yes.
So they ethically deserve the news. But there is a catch-22 situation here because you can always go behind a paywall or something and say, look, Google, you cannot look at my news. But, news organizations and Google or Facebook sort of deserve or lean on each other and need each other because content creates community and community distributes content. Therefore, what we need is a two-way understanding. But what is happening is that Australia has been the first country, and it should be commended for this, for actually raising this issue.
Yes.
Because other countries have been very slow to move. And I believe I'm not happy with the reply given by the minister because it shows a very passive, lackadaisical attitude. And if you go back to, let me compare it with cryptocurrency. Again, cryptocurrency has been around for more than 5-6 years now, and yet government moves a bill now. So why is the Indian government so passive on something of substantial importance? Is something which I have spent decades covering and gathering news, and I can tell you it's expensive. And we no longer have that kind of an advertising support. So the kind of technologies that helped in the 20th century have been disrupted by the new technology.
Yes.
And I'm not saying news tech giants should be what you call, it is for the government to sort of create a meaningful interface between the tech giants and the news gathering organization.
So that is why my question, Mr. Narayanan, sorry to interrupt you, that why is the government refraining from doing so or bringing in such a legislation? Are you suggesting that there are stakes involved for the government as well in this, which is why it's staying out of that?
I simply call it bureaucratic drift. I'm very upset of this because I'll tell you a reason. So India was one of the first countries in the world to enact an IT Act, something around the year 2000. Please remember, internet was only 5 years old in India, actually 4 years old, when India enacted a progressive IT legislation. That was under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, if I recollect. Now, why have we gone to sleep at the wheel after that? Whether it's cryptocurrency or news gathering or privacy, we are sort of slow to move on the ball. We'd like to take precedents from Australia today or America. I personally feel the time has come for India to take intellectual leadership of the digital economy worldwide. Because you cannot complain. You don't need technology from abroad. We have a lot of the technology. A lot of the internet technologies are open source. We have the history of both democracy as well as policy making. So I think that's why I feel let's look at it philosophically and ethically, because that's what they end up becoming laws in the end. You don't have to look at precedents. You should look at what is right.
Absolutely.
And there are independent small news.
But you also concede, Mr. Narayanan, you also concede that it's some sort of a, mutually beneficial sort of an equation.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
So content needs community and the community needs content. So, the idea is to then find a formula, isn't it? It's not about favoring news organizations or going against tech giants. It's about finding a solution to this where one party is clearly benefiting. And I'm not saying because I work for a news organization, it's pretty evident that the news content is consumed heavily in social media.
I can tell you, I once even wrote a paper for IIM Ahmedabad on the future of news. That was about 8, 9, 10 years ago, perhaps. So I've been following this issue for a while now, and I can only agree with you. The important point to remember is that there comes a power play somewhere, which is that if Google and Facebook think they are only distributing news and they have the control, they are trying to overlook the fact that there is content which is driving community. But that is why governments exist, because if there is no need for judiciaries or governments to make policies,
Okay.
if private parties
Right.
can always settle disputes.
I am interrupting you here. We are going across to
design.
breaking news. Yes, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Madhavan Narayan. Okay, we are cutting across to Rajesh Tope's statement to the media. Remember, the centre has written to the Maharashtra government in particular on the travel SOPs, saying that state rules or state SOPs, that is the standard operating procedure, must not be different from centres. The state has to align the SOPs with the centre. Rajesh Tope just made a statement on it, on Maharashtra government's guidelines. We're trying to get more information on this. But as of now, the centre has made it very clear that there cannot be two sets of SOPs, one by the state and the other by the centre. The two will have to be aligned and merged, and there has to be a centralised travel SOPs applicable across the country. Let's listen into what the Health Minister has